Salutations, my fellow food lovers. This is Chef Mark here from Johnny's Italian Steakhouse, and I want to tell you about our filet Oscar. This premium filet is topped with Johnny's lump crab cake, grilled asparagus, and our signature béarnaise sauce. But the start to any great night always begins with a killer appetizer, and I recommend trying out our jumbo pan-seared sea scallops with Brussels sprout slaw tossed in Johnny's hot bacon dressing. It is so good. I know that you will love my filet Oscar as much as I love preparing it, so come to Johnny's tonight. Johnny's Italian Steakhouse, Village Point Shopping Center, Omaha.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. This is episode number 77 coming at you this week. It is on the Cuban Missile Crisis, CMC, and the Bay of Pigs. We're going to talk about both of those because they do go hand in hand, and I will not bury the lead, and I'll say it in the podcast, I'll say it now. I thought they were the same thing. I'm not going to lie. For a while, I thought they were the same thing. We learned they are not. We learned a lot of things. Before we get to that, of course, we got a little bit of housekeeping to get to. HDTHappen.com is the website. HDTHappen for all the socials. If you listen here, then you already know that. Tried to update the website a little bit better. I'm gonna really put some effort into it, I think, in these next couple months, because it's actually time for me to renew my hosting. It's a little inside baseball there. So I think when I do that, I'm gonna, take some time to revamp, some spring cleaning, try to make it a site that we all can be proud of. But yeah, HTThappen.com for all that. What am I watching? I watched that show, Painkiller, on Netflix. It was good. It was really good. It was one of those shows I watched. Took all day. I started it at like 9 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's like hour long. I think like 6 episodes, I want to say. And so by like 2 o'clock, I'm like in it. I'm like series finale. But it's about the opioid crisis from 2008, but also back. It tells the entire story of the family, of the Sackler family, and their role in it, which is they're the proprietor. They literally made the drug, and I didn't really know how that worked really until watching the show. They explained everything. I want to say, if you have any interest in it whatsoever, like they're not interest, but if you're curious or like, I grew up during that time. I grew up as I was a teenager and a young adult during the opioid crisis, and it was a different time, man. It's hard to describe, but it was a time when people were dying left and right. You were seeing people like, oh, that person's definitely on something. And what they do is they tell the stories. They tell these stories. It's a scripted show, first off, but they tell the story of the Sackler family and the creation of OxyContin, but they intertwine these little, I don't want to call them vignettes, because they're really like, they go the length of the show. They basically tell multiple other stories about people who have been affected by the OxyContin. And like, there's one guy who like falls off a bulldozer and hurts his back. Wasn't heroin, wasn't into heroin or anything like that before. Got that for his back. He was able to work with it, but then got addicted to it. I don't want to, spoiler alert. I don't know. I won't tell you, because I'm telling you, you should watch it. I'm telling you, it's good. But yeah, so that's about that. What am I listening to? I have been listening to, let's see. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts on the Cuban Missile Crisis, because that's what we're doing this week. But I was also listening to one on the Idaho murders. I'm recently getting into that, doing that deep dive, because when it happened, there was just so much going on, I think, in my life, and also I just couldn't. There was no linear message when I would watch. I couldn't figure out. I don't know, not quite. I guess to me there wasn't. I couldn't. Not a through line that I could pick up and make it matter to me, or make me. Yeah, yes, I'm saying that right. But now I think it's just called the Idaho murders. Let me see. I don't have my phone with me right now. I should have it written down, but I don't. But if you, I guess basically all you have to do is search the Idaho murders in your podcast app, and it should come up because it was the first one. They've done a bunch of other stuff too, so it's a pretty good pod. But that stuff's interesting. Who doesn't love a good true crime, of course. But I don't know if there's much else to say before we get into the episode. As always, every other Monday we got the bite-sized bios coming at you. BSBs, we have done, I think, now 34 different people. And now, of course, they've started to trend in the direction of the episode topics that we do here at HCTH as well. So they're all in the 40s to 70s. Our last one was Harry S. Truman. We found out that S stands for nothing at all. It's just because a few people in his life also had S names, and they want to keep that going for some reason. But we're learning about him. We're going to be doing a lot of interesting people that I think now it will make sense once we talk about their actions to go back and learn about them. Like, I think the next one we're going to do is Stalin. I think and when you learn, I've only ever learned about the stuff he did as a tyrant, and that. But I think you find out his early life. You find out I think he was a dentist at some point or something like that. Or he went to seminary school. Like, I've studied a few of them now. They kind of run together. But like these guys, like, oh wow, you never think of it like that. Like Fidel Castro. He was an attorney. He was a lawyer, and then now he's Fidel Castro. This stuff's interesting. We're gonna cover all those people, bite-sized bios. If you check that out, and if you haven't, go check it out. But yeah, I don't think there's much else to get to before we get to the pod. I don't even know if there's going to be a breaking old news segment this week or not. I don't think there will be. But that's fine. We'll bring it back whenever it feels like it wants to come back and be with us. But yeah, without further ado, as we're known to do, here is the episode.
The characteristic of these new missile sites indicate two distinct types of installations. Several of them include medium-range ballistic missiles capable of carrying a nuclear warhead for a distance of more than 1,000 nautical miles. Each of these missiles, in short, is capable of striking Washington, D.C., the Panama Canal, Cape Canaveral, Mexico City, or any other city in the southeastern part of the United States, in Central America, or in the Caribbean area.
Okay, so we are here today to talk about the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, I'll be completely honest with you and say that before this, well, pretty much before this, I would say definitely as a child, I thought they were the same thing. I thought that they were just interchangeable nicknames for the same event. They are very much not that. They are very much two different events that happened about at least a year and a half apart. But they play into the same kind of end game, if you will. Now, we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about a little bit about Cuba as well, just to, as we do here, kind of lay down the groundwork, the foundation for the crisis, and we can't have the crisis without Cuba. But yeah, so the Cuban Missile Crisis, also known as the October Crisis of 1962, so that's what they call it in Russia, I believe, is also as well as in Cuba. They don't call it the Cuban Missile Crisis. They sometimes call it the Caribbean Crisis as well. But this was 1962 from October 16th to October 29th. It lasted 13 days. And I think what was interesting to hear people talk about was, it seems, okay, it's 13 days. It doesn't seem that long because you think of it like a war, right? You think of it like, I don't know, some sort of long, important, lasting event. But what it was during that time is people being afraid that they were going to be blown up. You know what I mean? Like, they were basically for about 2 weeks, people in America weren't sure if this was their last day or not. They weren't sure if they were going to walk outside to a blinding light and radioactive, air that would just take them off into another existence. They didn't. I never thought of it like that. You think of it just from the logistics standpoint, the missiles, the countries going back and forth, and the proxy wars and stuff like that. But when you think about the people, the American people during that time, who were just not sure on the day to day if Russia was going to end it all. And it's interesting to note. I don't know if we're going to get to it, so I'll go ahead and say it now. The nuclear missiles that were involved during that time were, I think, said to be like 1,000 times stronger than the ones that were dropped on Nagasaki and in Hiroshima. Because you have to remember, and I didn't really think about this as well, technology continues to progress, right? Like with anything. Think about the first iPhone compared to the ones we have now. You know what I mean? So you have to think about nuclear weapons somewhat like iPhones. Like they keep getting updated. So like the ones that we have, now, or even the ones that, that were on Cuba 20 years, or 17 years after the first one, the only one was ever really dropped on people. They said, I mean, it's so I say that to say it's so large because, or so powerful because if it were to be actually used and blown up, then it would cause like, I don't know, they said like crazy amounts of damage to places that aren't even anywhere near where they dropped the bomb because they're so massive, which is something people have to think about, which is one of the reasons that was one of the main reasons why we don't blow people up right now. All right, but yeah, so the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was a confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union, which escalated into an international crisis when American deployments of missiles in Italy and Turkey were matched by Soviet deployments of similar ballistic missiles in Cuba. And that's something that I didn't know until I did the research about this, is that really, it makes it seem, I mean, it's a big kind of a push, it's a move of aggression on the Soviets' part, but it is just matching what's already happening in Italy and Turkey. The fact that and that's one of the things that your other European countries were kind of telling America during that time. They were saying, we live like this all the time. We live with the possible fear that the Soviets could just blow us up at any point. You guys kind of just have to, you're preaching to the choir. Just kind of shut up and deal with it. We don't want to hear about y'all freaking out because that's every day for us. So I didn't really realize that we had already we were doing the same thing to them. We were literally already had missiles pointed at them. So it would only make sense as the other person, if it were you, if someone was pointing a missile at you, what do? You go point missiles at them. And so that's the Cuban Missile Crisis in a nutshell. But before we get actually to the crisis itself, we're going to go back into time, as we're known to do here, and do a little bit of the history, just a quick history of Cuba itself. Cuba. So historians, they believe the name Cuba comes from the Taino language. However, its exact derivation is unknown. Basically, they don't know how Cuba got its name, which I think was really interesting. I was looking because I was like, when you're looking up the history of stuff, you're like, oh, what did they name it? Why did they name it that? They were like, we don't really know. It's just Cuba. Like, oh, wow, all right. Like I said, the exact name is unknown. It could be translated to mean either fertile land or great place from that language. So that's kind of like, like I said, could mean a fertile, great place. There are some people that think that Christopher Columbus gave it its name because he got there in October of 1492. But I don't think, I mean, we give this guy Columbus a lot of credit. Can we not give him the naming of Cuba as well? I'm sure somebody else had to come up with that. But Cuba ended up being one of the largest slave capitals of the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade. They took over for basically Haiti after the Haitian uprising, which I believe we covered a little bit of, I think, on the transatlantic slave episode. I'm not sure. I think we did. I covered it on another one, I think. But once that happened, then Cuba kind of stepped in and was like, hey, we can be your Haiti. You can bring all your African slaves to us if you want, because we got a lot of sugar, or we need to make sugar. We got sugar cane. We need someone to cut that sugar cane down for us. So that's kind of what happened. And so one of the largest factors for growth of Cuba's commerce in the late 18th century and early 19th century was, like I said, the Haitian Revolution, when the enslaved peoples of what had been the Caribbean's richest colony freed themselves through a violent revolt. Cuban planters perceived the region's changing circumstances with both a sense of fear and opportunity. One, they were afraid it could happen to them, But then they were like, what if it doesn't? What if we just get really, really rich? And so they went for the latter. They wanted to change it into a Cuban slave society and produce a whole lot of sugar. An estimate suggests that between 1790 and 1820, there were more than 325,000 Africans that were brought to Cuba as slaves, which was 4 times the amount that had arrived in the 30 years prior to that. And that is, I've always wondered, because you look at Cubans, and Cubans, like, I mean, pretty much every other race or every other different nation out there, there's so many different variations of skin color. You can have dark Cubans who literally look black, and then you can have like these white people who say they're Cuban, and I just wonder how that happened. And a large part of it has to do with the fact, like I said, after the Haitian uprising, no one wanted to bring slaves to Haiti anymore, or they really couldn't, and so Cuba stepped up to become the next Haiti as far as slaves go, and that's how you get basically they just brought hundreds of thousands of black people to Cuba and made them work for free. And so one of the next larger parts of Cuban history would be the Spanish-American War, which we're going to skip, I guess, about 100 years from where we were just talking about. Because basically, in the treaty of the Spanish-American War, what ended the Spanish-American War, Spain gave America basically Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Guam, and then became a quote-unquote protectorate of the United States at that point. So that's what brings, I think, Cuba into the Western fold. Is really the Spanish-American War, and so that ran for about 6 months, about 4 months in 1898, and it began in the aftermath of the internal explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor in Cuba, leading to the United States coming into the Cuban War of Independence. And the war led to the United States emerging predominant in the Caribbean region and resulted in a U.S. acquisition of Puerto Rico, like we mentioned, as well as some other things in the Pacific. But that's basically, we go into that war and we come out with a bunch of different little island nations, some under different territorial authorities, basically, but whether they be colonies or quote unquote protectorates. And that's when we would start to see Cuba to thrive a little bit. We will become a vacation spot because it's not that far from America, which is why the Cuban Missile Crisis is so important. But it's, people were flying over there. They said the mafia had a large hand in the business that was happening there. It was kind of just like, it was just a place to jet set, as things would continue to progress in America. So I didn't mention that Cuba had gained their independence from America, I think 3 years after the Spanish-American War in 1902. And they would have a new constitution. But under that constitution, the U.S. retained the right to intervene in Cuban affairs and to supervise its finances and foreign relations. I mean, when you really start to look at this stuff and see just the underhanded nature that America, the way they operate, time and time again. I mean, just because when I don't think we'll get to it in here. Well, I'll talk about a little bit of it, but I mean, just the CIA's involvement in just stuff all over the world. But yeah, so they get their freedom from America in 1902. But back to kind of what I was saying, then becomes kind of a hub for just fun. They had clubs and people would go there and just, drink and have a good time. And it was somewhat of a nice place to be. But as all good stories usually do, they have to come to an end. And that good story comes to an end right around the 50s. Right around, there's a little bit of unrest. There's a man named Fulgencio Batista. All right, and he's running Cuba at this time, around 1952, give or take. And he's kind of corrupt, as most people in power are. And people around there, people are unhappy. They like him. They used to, but they don't like him so much anymore. There have been a couple Cuban revolutions, a couple assassination attempts on his life. One in particular is, I think, one that kind of ends up kind of kicking off kind of his end as far as politically. He actually ends up dying of natural causes in the 70s when he's pretty much exiled from his home country. But I think it was in 1953. Fidel Castro and his army of men, they basically try to take over the government in the Moncada barracks, I believe they say, July 26, 1953. But they're not successful. They're not successful. They're actually arrested. They're arrested and they're imprisoned for a while, and then they end up getting out. And then they do it again, I believe. Because they actually do. They try this multiple times. Let me make sure I'm getting this right. Because we're gonna do. I'm going to do a BSB on Fidel Castro. We just haven't gotten there yet. So I'm not as up on his journey Let's see. Because they had some elections that nobody believed in, basically. And what would really happen is I think one of the second in command to Batista had ended up saying he was gonna work with Fidel Castro, basically, and have Batista tried as a war criminal. And so when Batista heard this, he was like, "Not me, bro," and he dipped out. He left. He took his whole family and like $300 million, and he left. Where'd he go? He went to Puerto Rico, I think, the first time. Let's see. Dominican Republic. Yeah, he went to the DR. He would actually die in Portugal, like I said, in the 70s. Or excuse me, no, in Spain. He died in Spain. He died in Spain 2 days before a team of assassins was coming from Cuba to kill him. Jeez. But so, basically, once he leaves, Fidel takes power. He becomes, I guess, the president, I think is what they called him. Let me see. Yeah. Well, he establishes a provisional government. I'm not sure what he's considered at that point. He eventually does become the president. But in 1959, he establishes a provisional government that now he controls. America's not a big fan of that. Specifically, I think Eisenhower is the one we're working on it right now at that time in 59, because it will be kind of get passed on down to JFK. And I was watching some documentaries today about the Cold War overall, and it was just so interesting to hear the thought processes from different men who were making these decisions. They say that when Dwight D. Eisenhower passed the reins over to JFK, he is the only strategy he had for defeating communism in Eastern Europe was to just blow them up, was to drop nuclear weapons on every communist country. That was the only plan he had. Literally what he told JFK when he was like, "This is what I was thinking about doing." And the amount of times that people had to be stopped from using nuclear weapons, you find out in the last 70 years, it's literally a wonder we're still here. And we find that even with the Cuban Missile Crisis, we'll find there was a time when it almost happened. But we're almost there, guys. We did the history of Cuba. So now we are at the Bay of Pigs, because the Bay of Pigs, let's see, I believe it happens in 1960. So yeah, April 17th, 1961 is when the Bay of Pigs actually happened. But before that happened, the CIA basically commissioned a bunch of Cuban exiles. They say they even operated and got some people from Cuba. I only heard that once, so I don't know if I want to repeat that. But they found a bunch of people from this specific neighborhood in Miami, they said, and they took them to Guatemala basically and trained them, because the whole idea behind all this specifically and the way the CIA operated overall was the plausible deniability of whatever they were doing. So it couldn't look like America was doing this. It couldn't look like America had a hand in this. So they took them out of the country, had them trained to kind of become like soldiers, if you will, and then they sent them in to Cuba to have them overthrow Castro's government. It did not work. The first stated objective of the plan was to bring about the replacement of the Castro regime with one more devoted to replace it with one more devoted to the true interests of the Cuban people and more acceptable to the U.S. in such a manner to avoid any appearance of U.S. intervention. Basically, we want to get in there and change the leader so it works for us, which is just, I don't know. Like I said, you talk about the way America goes about it. Who's to say? Well, how are we the ones to get to say how you get to run your nation? Why do we feel like we have that power? It's, I don't know. So they did a bunch of things to actually, kind of get ready, like I was saying. The program was approved by Eisenhower before he left office in March 1960. And the Cuban exiles were led by Jose Miro Cardona, and he was the head anti-Castro Cuban. And they actually, there's interviews with these guys, because while a few of them died, I think it was 170 people died when they tried to go and take out Castro, but a lot of them, I think there was something like 12,000 of them. I think 10,000, give or take. But yeah, most of them were captured. Now, it wasn't a secret from the get-go. They were hoping that it was, but Castro found out and knew something was coming. and tried to be, and then that's probably why it didn't work out, because he was prepared.
Wake up at Holiday Inn Express to a can't-miss breakfast that's free with every stay. Count on all the hot, fresh coffee you need and an incredible breakfast buffet that has something for everyone, like eggs, cinnamon rolls, and even hot, fresh pancakes with all the toppings you crave. Next time, do yourself a favor and stay at a Holiday Inn Express with a can't-miss breakfast that's free with every stay. So, when you wake up at Holiday Inn Express, you'll wake up happy, a part of IHG Hotels and Resorts.
When you download the Baker's app, you have easy access to savings every day. Get the most out of weekly sales and receive personalized coupons to save on your favorite items, all while earning 1 fuel point for every $1 spent. Baker's makes it easy to save while you shop, whether it's in-store or online, so you get the most value out of every trip, every time. Download the Baker's app now to save big on your next purchase. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Must have a digital account to redeem offers. Restrictions may apply. See site for details.
Yeah, so through Cuban intelligence, Castro learned of the guerrilla training camps in Guatemala as early as October 1960, that's at least 6 months before they were even going to come over here and do that. Shortly after his inauguration in February of 61, President Kennedy authorized the invasion plan. He was determined to keep it disguised, though, like I said, the plausible deniability. And it's called the Bay of Pigs, honestly, because that's where they went in. I thought they just made up a wild name, but the Bay of Pigs already existed. The site was a remote, swampy area on the southern coast of Cuba, where a night landing force would bring ashore the Cuban exiles with hopefully little resistance, and could hide any U.S. involvement. Unfortunately, the landing site also left the invading force more than 80 miles from any of the refuge, that they could take. The idea was to, if things got bad, to run into these mountains, because they had picked a couple different sites before that were closer to the mountains, because I guess that was going to help them. And when they changed the site to the Bay of Pigs, they didn't change a refuge site. They didn't change a place for them to go if things got bad. So the only place they could go was 80 miles away. So that wasn't really going to work. So the actual plan of what happened is the original invasion plan called for 2 airstrikes, right, against Cuban air bases. 1,400 man force, invasion force, would disembark under cover of darkness and launch a surprise attack. Paratroopers would drop in, advance the invasion, and disrupt the transportation and repel Cuban forces. Simultaneously, a smaller force would then land on the coast of Cuba to create confusion. The main forces would advance across the island to Matanzas and set up a defensive position. The United Revolutionary Front would send leaders from South Florida and establish a provisional government. The success of the plan depended on the Cuban population joining the invaders. So the success involved the people wanting this to happen. And the reality of it is, I don't think they did. Castro knew that it was coming, and the people were not looking to be liberated in the way that America wanted them to be. So what really happened, the first mistake happened on April 15th, 1961, when 8 bombers left Nicaragua to bomb the Cuban airfields. The CIA had used obsolete World War II B-26 bombers and painted them to look like the Cuban Air Force. The bombers missed many of their targets and left most of Castro's Air Force intact, so they didn't even do their job. And actually, I heard a little tidbit about this, that these planes, it was another way that they found out that America was involved, is I guess one of these planes crashed, and the Cubans were able to get their hands on it, and they could see that it was the B-26, and it was painted like a Cuban Air Force. The paint was fresh on these airplanes, so it couldn't have been like a taken, because it's supposed to be the story was that I guess that one of the pilots had escaped, taken the plane, and then had escaped Cuba in the plane and was going to come back and now bomb them. It's like, how is that even possible if he just painted this plane to look like us? It's a lot. But basically, as news broke out of the attack, photos of the repainted U.S. planes became public, and they revealed the American support for the invasion. So Kennedy canceled the second airstrike. Basically, he was like, this is not going to work. They already know that it's us. On April 17th, the Cuban exiles, they ran up on Cuba. They were called the Brigade 2506. They landed on the beaches on the Bay of Pigs and immediately came under fire. Immediately getting shot up. Cuban planes, they were coming at those guys. They sank 2 escort ships and destroyed half of the exiled air support. And what they also say during that is that the entire time the Cuban exiles had been told that if you have an issue America will step in. Like basically almost like, like your dad watching you from the side of the pool. Like, if you start to sink or whatever, I'm gonna hop in there and get you. That's what they were told. It never happened. And there was American ships around. The support was there. It just they never pushed the button. They said there was a carrier group out there, I think they said, and a group of Marines who were waiting, just for to hear to go. But they were never given the word. And so it did not work out very well. The bad weather hampered the ground force, which had to work with soggy equipment and insufficient ammunition. Over the next 24 hours, Castro ordered roughly 20,000 troops to advance toward the beach, and the Cuban Air Force continued to control the skies. As the situation grew increasingly grim, President Kennedy authorized an air umbrella at dawn on April 19th, and 6 unmarked American fighter planes took off to help the brigade. But the planes arrived an hour late, most likely confused by the change in time zones, which I heard that in a documentary. It was just like, think about the mistakes that happened over and over again. They didn't even contemplate that basically that Cuba was in the Eastern time zone, and Nicaragua was in the Central Standard time zone. So when you're trying to figure out when you're going to get there, they just got there at the wrong time because they just didn't have their times right. It's wild. They were actually ended up being shot down, and the invasion would be done later on that day. Some exiles were able to escape to the sea. A lot of them were killed. The rest of them were actually rounded up. Almost 1,200 people were taken as prisoners of war. More than 100 were killed. I think my numbers that I saw said 170. 170 people were 170 of the Cuban exiles were killed. It's gruesome. So the aftermath. What happened afterwards? So the prisoners, they remained in captivity for 20 months. Almost a year, it's almost 2 years, while their freedom was being negotiated by Robert F. Kennedy and Fidel Castro. They were eventually freed, like I said, 20 months after their capture, in exchange for $53 million worth of baby food and medicine. Just baby food and medicine, I guess. And a lot of the Cuban exiles, they, in the interviews that I saw, they were very unhappy with America because I think that, they thought they were going to get more help. I think they thought, I don't know, I feel like the Americans, I feel like Kennedy thought for whatever reason that when they're going to run up in there and they're going to get it done and we will just sit back and not have to worry about helping out or anything like that. It's like, nah, it's not how it worked. But, Kennedy's, he's still mad. He still wants Castro out of power. He wants Castro gone. He wants his government to be controlled, or that government to be controlled as if it is his government. So he won't stop. Even after that, they do Operation Mongoose, which is just another way they're trying to sabotage and destabilize the Cuban government. That doesn't end up working. But what I can say is that we are now on to the Cuban Missile Crisis. But before we get there, as normal with these longer episodes, give yourself a round of applause. Yeah. Because you've made it at least halfway through. Now we're gonna get to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is actually there's not much to it, really, but you have to lay, the foundation for why it even matters. There's so much, and that's why I'm glad we're still doing these episodes like this in this theme, is because I learned in the scheme of things, we talked about the Berlin Wall a couple episodes ago, and I didn't realize in the timeline the Berlin Wall gets put up in between the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, because you have to think it's the same two nations at war in the Berlin Wall and what we're talking about right now, and it's all happening in chronological order. You know what I mean? Like these decisions, they say that the Bay of Pigs had an influence on the creation of the Berlin Wall. That what's his face, Khrushchev? Is it Khrushchev? Gorbachev. It's Khrushchev, Nikita Khrushchev. That he wasn't happy with how America was doing with Cuba. I mean, among other things, there were things that were going on, but that was one thing. And then, literally, I mean, you look. I think the Bay of Pigs was in April of '61, and was it in August of '61 they put up the Berlin Wall? Literally, 4 months later. 4 months later, they put up the Berlin Wall after it's been discovered that America was trying to overthrow the Cuban government, which is backed by Russia. This stuff is not a coincidence. It's not just random acts of history. They're all connected, which is, that's why I'm glad we're doing this 40s to 70s theme, because it's all in here, man. We're talking about the same stuff, or it's the same people, the same that are just doing a bunch of different things. So yeah, Cuban Missile Crisis. 13 days. In 1961, the U.S. government put Jupiter nuclear missiles in Italy and Turkey. It also had trained a paramilitary force of Cuban exiles to invade Cuba, which we just talked about, the Bay of Pigs, and we know that did not work. The Soviet administration was concerned about a Cuban drift towards China, which, the Soviets, while they were like, we're cool because we're both communists, but we're not like cool, we're not that cool. So they wanted to get it first. And it made sense also, when you really think about it, from like a chess move, from like that, it makes sense even from Cuba's standpoint, because basically, if you look at the way Cuba was set up, they had been like a little brother to America for a long time, and they were, used to using that relationship. They were benefiting from that relationship, and then America cut them off, right? And so, what do you do when we cut off by one entity? You go to the next one. They're both powerful. So you have the one is the most powerful nation in the world. The other is like one of the second more powerful nations in the world. So the first one cuts you off, you go to the second. And that's what they were doing. That's how they viewed it. When Russia kind of stepped in and started to back them, give them resources, and wanted to put missiles on their island, they're like, yeah, this is going to help solidify our relationship with Russia. So an agreement was reached during a secret meeting in July of '62, and construction of a number of missile launch facilities started later that summer. During the campaigning for the 1962 election, the White House denied charges for months and ignored the presence of Soviet missiles positioned approximately 90 miles away.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Later, they would find out, basically because it was confirmed by a U-2 spy plane that produced clear photographic evidence of the bases. They had set up like full-on bases, like military bases, basically for these rockets. And they would find, I think there was something like 40,000 Soviet soldiers in Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. 40,000. When this was reported to JFK, he convened a meeting of the 9 members of the National Security Council and 5 other advisors in a group that came to be known as EXCOM, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. And during this meeting, President Kennedy was advised originally to carry out an airstrike on Cuban soil in order to compromise the Soviet missile supplies that would then be followed by an invasion of mainland Cuba. They thought about it for a while, and they realized that's probably not the best thing to do, especially, well, they wouldn't know. They didn't know that there were that many Soviets on the island, but in retrospect, people think that if that had happened, that would have led to nuclear war, is what they think, because basically they didn't know how invested Russia was in Cuba, and if they had blown them up or attempted to, they probably would have, pressed the button on their nukes. And so what really happened, or once Kennedy found out about the missiles, he basically did a quarantine, if you will. A lot of people call it a blockade. I don't think it's technically by textbook standards called a blockade. They use the words quarantine specifically because I think blockade is a war term. It's considered an act of war by legal definition. So they used the term quarantine. They would just kind of quarantined Cuba to make it so that no more missiles could show up. And so this led to several days of tense negotiations between Khrushchev and Kennedy. And they eventually came to an agreement that, they would take the missiles down. Publicly, the Soviets would dismantle their offensive weapons in Cuba and return them to the Soviet Union, subject to the United Nations verification in exchange for a public declaration and agreement. In exchange for a U.S. public declaration and an agreement to not invade Cuba again. Secretly, the United States agreed with the Soviets that it would dismantle all of the Jupiter MRBMs which had been deployed And I guess that was embarrassing for Khrushchev because no one knew that he got something out of the deal. It looked as if Russia was had to go back with their tail between their legs, but on the public surface. But below the surface, he had actually been able to strike a deal to have them remove the missiles from Italy and Turkey, which is it's like I said, in all this, which I didn't know much about it. I didn't know that we were already basically doing the same thing to them. It's really is. There's this okay, so you can do it, but I can't do it sort of thing with America time and time again. It seems here. But that's really how it was resolved. The blockade / quarantine itself would officially end on November the 20th, and then we would just continue to be in the Cold War. But that's the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm not sure if there's much else. I think one of the larger things about this is that the Moscow-Washington hotline was established because of these negotiations and agreements, which is kind of the it's like the go between the two countries. It allowed them to negotiate other things in the future. But also, I think one of the main takeaways, I think what makes it so interesting, I think to some people, at least to me, is that humanity itself could have been on the brink of extermination, and that I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure we've come close in other times during the Cold War, but that was one that was just fully on Front Street. Everyone could see the how serious it was, and like they say, I mean, they really were almost launched. But I don't know. We're moving now out of the 40s and into the 50s. We were briefly in the 50s for this. Most of this happens in the 60s. Of course, what happens before makes it all matter. Now we're seeing a different part of the Cold War, a different part of the U.S.-Russian relations. But it goes without saying, to watch the evolution from the World War II, basically being allies against the Third Reich, and going from that to fighting over Berlin and Cuba. I mean, literally at the exact same time. Like that's why I think that's to me when I my mouth dropped open, because it's like something you don't think about. It's there for you to know. The timeline is no one's hiding this, but you don't think about it in that way of just it's like it was like the last straw for Nikita Khrushchev, when he was just like, and you're gonna invade Cuba too? You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to build something here. I'm trying to siphon as much money out of Berlin as I can from their industries, and also have my hand over here dealing with Cuba, and maybe a little bit over here with China too, even though they don't really like us that much. But you know what I mean. And then I'm gonna find out that you took some Cuban citizens who were mad at me, or mad at Cuba, and then tried to over there, and it didn't work. And meanwhile, I'm fighting you in Europe too. It's all happening at the same time. It is interesting. It all makes more sense. So we're gonna get. I say that to say we are now entering into the 50s and the 60s part of it. We're gonna cover the Korean War. It's gonna be its own episode. We're gonna cover Fidel Castro, and Stalin. I think is actually the next one up on the BSBs. I'm not sure. I think he is. Learn about him. I don't know, all this stuff. It makes you wonder. I think, and that could be just, I don't know if I'm biased or because I'm studying. I think this is one of the more important parts of human history, probably, when you think about it. Of the different, you could say big stuff happened in the 1700s, big stuff happened in the 1400s, and certainly it did. But you think about once we all kind of came to the modern table, once we all modernized, once we all have the ability to use nuclear weapons, then what? Which is, it's, and I heard, did I hear that, or am I thinking it out myself? But I've heard that all of humanity has just been an evolution into the nuclear bomb. I don't know why someone, I'm not trying to say I'm taking it that I made it up, but I think I might have just made it up. But because we get here now and it's like, okay, so what now? Like we've gotten the most extreme weapon. I mean, relatively the most extreme weapon ever. Well, how do we fight now? What do we fight with now? I don't know, but yeah, that's the Cuban Missile Crisis. All right, that was the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Stuff that I feel like just went over my head when I was a kid learning it in 8th grade or 10th grade, whenever we learned that stuff. It was it's interesting just because of how close we all almost came to. Well, not we all. I wasn't alive. My parents were alive, but I was not. So I won't say we. I'll say we as Americans. America, how close we all came to being just blown up. I'm wondering, where it fits in, I guess, the most interesting or serious moments of the 20th century. I would imagine, I don't know, would you give it top 10? That's something that we may cover. That'd be interesting. Top 10 most important moments of the 20th century, and then dive into how they happened. Because we can just workshop and brainstorm here. I would say JFK's assassination was a very, it sent shockwaves, I think, and not just to say that, it's to say, just speaking cliches, but, I think it changed the way presidents and pretty much anybody else, I think, of any kind of power saw themselves, interacting with people. You look back, it's like, it didn't seem crazy then, but the idea of a president just riding in a convertible through a street, now we're just like, yeah, you definitely wouldn't do that. But why do we know you don't do that? Because JFK got his brain exploded by the CIA. Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm not sure. But yeah, so that's definitely a point. That's definitely a piece. I don't know. And then you start to think, because you would say 9/11, right? But 9/11 was in the next century, so it couldn't be that. World War II, definitely, definitely one of the more important or serious matters of the 20th century. And I don't know. I think also, and then we can get off this, because this is the end of the episode. I don't know why we're still debating topics, but I would say the change of the way people view sexual assault with women. I think that's something, because you look back, we'll probably never cover this on the pod, but like the jail time for like rape in the 70s and 60s was like 30 days in some places. There's no like, because they just didn't care. And so, because that's why you look back in those times, you would have a lot of rapists. That would be a thing. People would rape because it was like, oh, I can do this. I can get away with it. So I only spend a month in jail, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months for raping a woman. And so that to make that change, to turn and say that's now a problem, then in the same way that the Me Too movement would do in the 2010s. But yeah, so that's at least 5 or 6 right there. Okay, well, we just cracked open a new the next segment of how did that happen, because we'll be doing the 40s and 70s, like I said, because the way the podcasts come out, slow rolled like this, which I still think has been better for the move. If you've been following for a long time, we didn't always used to do it like this. It was a weekly podcast for the first year of its existence, but we do 2 a month now, and I think it's better. But we'll be doing these for at least another, I don't know, whether the 40s and 70s to at least till Thanksgiving, I think. I really want to dive in. I really want to get in. I still want to do a Russia Part 2. I think about it all the time. Russia Part 2 is coming. We still have to talk about the 60s. We're not even really going to talk about the 70s. I say the 70s is really up until Watergate is where I'm going to stop this idea of the theme, because we've already covered Watergate, and I do feel like things change. Hoover dies. Like I mentioned in the Watergate episode, Hoover dies in 72, I think, whenever a month before Watergate. Just like with this, kind of, I feel like the beginning of this theme, FDR dies a month before, or like 3 weeks before Adolf Hitler dies. So that's what kind of kicks, I think, a lot of things into motion. Think about a world where that doesn't happen, a world where Adolf Hitler lives, not even gets to run Germany, but just gets captured, and then, and then he just like maybe becomes like a low level like salesman somewhere, or like a movie star in like another country. Be a weird world. But all right, going on too much here. But yeah, so htthappen.com is where you can find all the good stuff. htthappen, or at htthappen for all the socials. You guys know what to do there. Appreciate you coming back week to week, pressing play. I always do. Give us 5 stars if you love this, wherever you're listening to it. Give us 2 stars if you didn't love us. Tell you why you didn't. Tell us why you didn't love it. Because constructive criticism is always welcome. So we'll see you next week with the next Bite Size Bio.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.